Peter had a habit of treating me badly with his harsh words and always trying to control my actions. On top of that, he was unfaithful to me. While on a trip with his mistress, they were both involved in a terrible accident. After the accident, I went to visit Peter in the hospital. Instead of showing any regret, he immediately assumed I wouldn't want to take care of him now that he was paralyzed from the waist down. What shocked me even more was his arrogance. He actually suggested that I should take care of both him and his mistress, Emily. He even went as far as saying that Emily could decide on the home decor while I simply followed their wishes. As if that wasn't enough, Peter criticized me for treating his mistress like just a housekeeper. Hearing this filled me with anger, especially when I remembered the time I was injured, and he didn't even bother to help me. My name is Mary. I am 48 years old, and I once believed that I had married a hardworking and honest man. But soon after our wedding, Peter showed his true colors. He was controlling and often cruel. Still, I stayed with him, partly because of his son, Arthur. Arthur was from a previous relationship, but he treated me with the love of a real mother. Their close bond touched my heart and made me hope that Peter would change for the better. 3 years into our marriage, when Arthur was in 5th grade, I began thinking about getting a job. With Arthur growing older, I had more free time, and I wanted to contribute financially. I saw other mothers working to support their children's education, and it inspired me. So, I suggested to Peter that I take on a part-time job. His reaction was shocking. He became furious, thinking I was insulting his ability to provide for our family. I tried to explain that I wanted to help save for Arthur's future and our retirement, but he took it as an attack on his pride. Instead of discussing it rationally, he accused me of being unfaithful. What started as a simple conversation about financial planning turned into baseless accusations. Peter had a very outdated way of thinking. He refused to see our marriage as a partnership where both husband and wife contribute. I was in perfect health, and Arthur no longer needed constant care. Other women my age were starting careers, but Peter dismissed my dreams, saying I wouldn't be able to handle both a job and housework. He refused to help with any household chores and insisted that my only role was to take care of the home while he focused on his career. It was clear he had no intention of supporting me in any way, so I eventually gave up and remained a full-time housewife. A few years later, I had an accident while cycling to the supermarket. I fractured my arm, making it impossible to keep up with housework. Arthur, now a high school senior, stepped up to help, but Peter, he showed no sympathy. He treated my injury as nothing more than an inconvenience to him. He still expected me to do all the housework, despite the doctor's orders to rest. His lack of care and selfishness became more obvious than ever. Instead of offering any support, he simply complained about how my injury disrupted his routine. As time went on, I began to suspect Peter of being unfaithful. One day, he announced a business trip for a long weekend, and something about his excitement seemed off. He suddenly started paying more attention to his appearance and became secretive with his phone. It didn't take long for me to realize this so-called business trip was actually a getaway with his mistress. The final clue was a New York travel guide left out in the open, something he wouldn't need for a work trip. That was when I decided to confirm my suspicions. One night, while he was asleep, I used his fingerprint to unlock his phone. What I found was undeniable proof, texts and photos between him and his mistress, making plans for their secret trips together. I was furious but chose not to confront him immediately. Arthur had important exams coming up, and I didn't want to cause him stress. Instead, I started gathering more proof, planning to use it when I filed for divorce. Before I could act, I received a phone call that changed everything. The emergency center informed me that Peter had been in a serious accident. Despite my anger, I couldn't ignore the news. I quickly packed some essentials and rushed to the hospital. Seeing Peter lying in a hospital bed, injured and vulnerable, was a shock. The doctors told me he had suffered a spinal cord injury and might never walk again. As I tried to process this, a police officer confirmed something I already suspected. Peter had not been alone during the accident. His mistress had been with him. Hearing this hurt, but it didn't erase my concern for his health. As Peter faced the reality of his condition, I realized how much our lives were about to change. Our home would need modifications, and he would likely have to work from home. Despite everything he had done, his recovery became the immediate priority. I knew I had to put my own feelings aside, at least for now. 2 months passed before I visited him again. By then, I had decided to go through with the divorce, but I still wanted to see how he was doing. When I arrived, Peter seemed surprisingly optimistic about his recovery. He even invited me to have coffee with him as a thank you for bringing his clothes. I found it odd, but I accepted his invitation. When we got to the lounge, I saw that he wasn't alone. A woman in a wheelchair was sitting with him. She greeted Peter warmly, and the way they interacted left no doubt that they were close. At first, I assumed she was his mistress, but what happened next shocked me even more. Peter suggested that I should take care of both him and this woman, Emily, after they were discharged from the hospital. He casually mentioned that Emily could handle the home decor while I focused on taking care of them. I couldn't believe his audacity. He was treating me like a servant, just as he always had. His arrogance made me furious. He never supported me when I was injured, yet he expected me to look after him and this woman? I was about to refuse when Peter explained something that caught me off guard. Emily wasn't his mistress, she was the wife of his manager. He introduced her formally, and she politely greeted me. Peter insisted that there was nothing romantic between them, saying they were just friends. He even pointed out that Emily preferred older men, as if that proved he hadn't been unfaithful. I wasn't convinced. His history of lying made it hard to believe anything he said. Emily then accused me of being jealous. That was the final straw. Peter had always dismissed my feelings, and now he was doing it again. He tried to justify everything, but I had already made up my mind. His betrayal, his arrogance, and his complete lack of respect for me had gone too far. This moment confirmed what I had known for a long time: our marriage was beyond repair. That day, I walked away from Peter for good, knowing that I deserved better. I had spent years trying to make things work, but now, I was finally ready to put myself first. From the moment Emily suggested that I should extend my caregiving duties beyond Peter's son and care for her as well, I knew she was being both mocking and unreasonable. Peter's agreement with her only made matters worse. It felt as if the years I had spent supporting him and his son were being twisted into an obligation to care for everyone in his life, including his mistress. Their logic was ridiculous, and my patience was wearing thin. I called them out on it, demanding honesty about their affair. At first, they both denied it, but when I revealed undeniable proof from Peter's phone, their deception unraveled. Instead of taking responsibility, Peter immediately turned the focus on me, accusing me of invading his privacy. His hypocrisy was staggering, considering the betrayal I had just uncovered. As we argued, his attempt to downplay my role in Arthur's life stung deeply. I had been there for Arthur, emotionally and physically, far more than Peter had ever been. The tension was thick, but the drama escalated when Mr. Jonathan, Emily's husband and Peter's manager, entered the room in a hospital bed. His arrival changed everything. The truth about the accident that had brought him here was shocking. Peter had crashed into his car without realizing who the victim was. Emily had told him at the time, but he had failed to grasp the significance. Mr. Jonathan's calm but calculated demeanor suggested he had been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal himself. It became clear that this accident was not just a random mishap but a collision tangled in betrayal and deception. Emily, overwhelmed with anger, lashed out at Peter, exposing more details of their affair and the car crash. She blamed him for ruining her life, both emotionally and physically. On top of that, her husband, Mr. Jonathan, revealed his intent to seek compensation, not just for the accident but also for the affair. He demanded money for medical bills, car repairs, and emotional damages, all while smirking at Peter's expired insurance and reckless behavior. Emily didn't hold back in criticizing Peter. She ridiculed their relationship, calling it superficial and dull, and mocked his arrogance. She made it clear that he was not as charming or successful as he believed himself to be. Then, turning to me, she insulted me for enduring Peter's mistreatment for so long, making it seem as though I had been a fool. Her words were cruel, but they only reinforced my resolve. As the argument reached its peak, I made my stance clear: I would not be manipulated into taking care of Peter's mistress. The sheer audacity of such a suggestion was beyond reason. Meanwhile, Peter made a desperate attempt to salvage his relationship with Emily, but she rejected him outright. Her final decision to cut ties with both of us marked a decisive end to this tangled mess. Before leaving the room, Emily maneuvered her wheelchair with practiced ease, ensuring Peter knew she expected him to pay for the damage he had done. As the confrontation died down, Peter, still reeling from Emily's rejection, turned to me for support, trying to use our marriage as leverage. But I was done. I handed him divorce papers, unwilling to delay the inevitable any longer. Peter's shock quickly turned to resentment. He accused me of being selfish despite his years of neglect and mistreatment. He tried to remind me of the support he had given me in the past, but his words only fueled my determination. When he attempted to blame me for my past injuries, suggesting I had been careless, I coldly pointed out the irony of his current predicament. He had no choice but to sign the papers, officially ending our miserable marriage. The situation took another turn when Arthur walked in and confronted his father. He had discovered that Peter had drained his college savings for selfish reasons. Instead of apologizing, Peter justified his actions and even suggested that Arthur should take care of him after the divorce. His complete lack of responsibility was appalling. Then, a revelation shifted the power dynamics. Arthur accidentally mentioned my inheritance from my late aunt. With that money, I had secured financial independence, ensuring that Arthur's college education was no longer in jeopardy. When I also mentioned my intent to seek alimony, Peter panicked, realizing he was losing control of the situation. He attempted to appeal to Arthur, hoping his son would still support him, but Arthur had reached his limit. He firmly rejected Peter, refusing to be used as a safety net for his father's failures. Arthur announced that he would be attending an out-of-state college, directly defying Peter's expectations. Peter was stunned, realizing how disconnected he had become from his own son's life. He tried to insist that he had always put his family first, but his actions proved otherwise. Arthur called him out on his hypocrisy, pointing out the years of neglect and mistreatment towards me, the one person who had always been there for him. It was a turning point. Arthur made it clear that his loyalty lay with me, not with a father who had prioritized his own selfish desires over his family's well-being. With both Arthur and I cutting ties, Peter found himself alone, facing the consequences of his choices. His financial troubles worsened as rumors of his affair spread at work, damaging his professional reputation. The scandal left him isolated, with no one to turn to. Meanwhile, Emily had to adapt to her new reality, living independently in a small apartment and working a job in computing. It wasn't an easy transition, but it was a fresh start, one that we both needed. As for me, I used my inheritance and the divorce settlement to fund Arthur's college expenses and buy myself an apartment. I no longer had to walk on eggshells or worry about Peter's constant criticism. For the first time in years, I felt free. I even returned to work part-time, rediscovering the satisfaction of earning my own income. My days were now filled with productivity and fulfillment. Peter, unable to accept my newfound independence, sent me a mocking message, suggesting I must be lonely and that he should visit. He even had the audacity to ask for money as thanks for his so-called support. I immediately blocked him. But he didn't stop there. Somehow, he managed to get my address from Arthur and showed up uninvited. His presence was both infuriating and unsettling. I had no choice but to call the police. They arrived promptly, and after I filed a formal complaint, Peter was arrested. With that, the last remnant of Peter's hold on my life was finally gone. I could move forward without looking back, ready to embrace the future on my own terms.